Welcome to Forward with Truth with your host Nathan Anderson, and I'm here with my good friend Dr. David Luke, who is a current lecturer of systematic and historical theology in the Irish Baptist College. He's a former pastor of Gilnahirk Baptist and quite a few other locations in his time. Years studying the intersection of faith, history, culture and theology, and we'll start by exploring his personal journey to faith and ministry, as well as what led him into his love of history and teaching. Then we'll dive into the question of Western civilisation and the claim that the Enlightenment made the West great. But Dr. Luke's arguing that Christianity, particularly Reformed Christianity, was its true foundation. We'll examine historical counter-arguments, including Edward Gibbon's seminal work on the fall of Rome and the Christian Byzantium. Moving on today, we're going to discuss the crisis of secularism, the God-shaped hole in the West, and how this led to moral decay. And then finally, we'll critique modern atheism, looking at a lack of moral grounding and why some prominent atheists are now reconsidering their position. Dr. Luke, it's a pleasure to have you with us this day.
Thanks for the invitation to be here and be part of the podcast.
Indeed, thank you very much. And how is East Belfast these days?
East Belfast still in the same place, and and I think like a lot of places, East Belfast is changing, and just as society is changing. So I think there's an old joke, isn't there? It's a Chinese curse, me live in interesting times, you know. So
Indeed.
we maybe live in interesting times.
I think we do. So, David, can you share us a bit about your faith? How did you come to faith, and what's your background, and what was the way in which you met Christ?
I grew up in a pretty ordinary kind of background. I grew up in Ballymena and lived in a council house in Ballymena. My dad worked in the sort of general area of light engineering. My mum was a stay-at-home mum. So grew up very happy, very stable home. Probably grew up in an age when everybody had a church connection.
Yeah.
My parents were Christians. Took me along to church. A very vivid memory of my mum reading me the Christmas story from the Bible as a child. So kind of brought up with Christian parents, and I say in a kind of a church connected area. Mm-hmm. You know, everybody at a church. Not many people went, but everybody at a church. And as kids, we all went to Sunday school, and that kind of connection was there. And we occasionally would have had conversations about God, mm-hmm. And I had a very vivid memory of being about 10 or 11 and walking to school one day and discussing these things with the guy I was walking to school with, and we concluded that everybody was a Christian. Yes. So we had that kind of mentality, I suppose. And but around about that time, we moved churches. So I'd grown up actually in a very liberal church, and we moved churches. And as we moved churches, this church was more evangelical in its ethos. But I think one of the big factors for me around that time was that I met some young people, and they started to talk about becoming Christians.
Right.
So that really challenged my perception a bit of what a Christian was, and they talked about conversion. And again, that was a bit of a game changer for me as well. So I spent probably a couple of years really thinking some of these things through, and realizing that whatever they had, whatever experience they'd had as Christians, certainly I hadn't had that. Did trouble me a little bit, and then just before my 13th birthday, I'd gone on a boys' brigade camp, and when I come home, it was the point in my life where I realised that I needed to undergo conversion, as it were, and I asked the Lord to forgive me, and give my life over to Him, and that was the beginning of the Christian journey for me. All happened the day before Elvis Presley died.
Right.
Yeah, so I sometimes think, as one king died, another one entered my life. Maybe a bit of a cheesy way to think about it, but sometimes resonates a little bit with me.
Didn't realise you were such a big fan.
Oh, well.
Although he did do some gospel songs, some very good ones as well. But I suppose, so you were raised, and for those that maybe aren't in Northern Ireland, Ballymena is the Bible Belt. Yeah. It's the heartland of where Ian Paisley came from. It was and at that time when you were in school, like, there would have been a huge Christian influence through schooling. Yeah. So you sort of had this idea that Christianity was just by birth. Yeah. I'm an Ulsterman, I live in Ballymena, of course I'm a Christian. Yeah. But then you realised that you had to interface with God personally. Yeah,
and I say really that came about through listening other young people who talked about that, and I probably heard this from my earliest times, but at some point it begun the penny begun to drop, and I sometimes resonate with something Jonathan Edwards has written, where he talks about, you can hear the same truth for many years and it have no impact on you, but then suddenly the Holy Spirit comes and open your eyes, and suddenly the things you've known for a long time fall into place and make sense in a different way. And I suppose looking back, that's really what had happened to me.
Very good. So then what led you to become a pastor? Yeah. Obviously there's, you don't just become a Christian and say, I'm going to be a pastor now. So what was it? What was that journey like?
Yeah. In some respects it was a long one. So I probably had begun to think about this when I was approaching A-levels, 17, 18, beginning to think about and the end of school, what happened next, and certainly something that was on my radar at that time was some form of Christian ministry. I would probably have jumped into it straight out of school, but the Lord had other plans, and I left school, went to study history, studied history for 4 years. Then after that, I worked for a while in a public relations company. Discovered that wasn't for me. That didn't kind of chime with my abilities and interests, really. And then I got a job as an historical researcher. I worked on a project at Queen's University in Belfast called The History of the Irish Parliament from 1692 to 1800. So I spent a few years doing that, and then by that stage I began to think more seriously in terms of Christian ministry. I was doing a bit more preaching in churches, a bit more work in my own church in terms of Bible study, and there was a little bit of me thinking, it'd be good to do this full time, and wouldn't it be a good way maybe to employ some of the gifts that God had given me. So I say those seeds were about for a long time, and then I suppose that was confirmed then when I began to have conversation with churches, my church membership then, and that began to be confirmed that, the Lord was calling me in that direction, and I had the support of my church, and that was really helpful in terms of just assuring me that I was moving in the right direction. So I went to study at the Irish Baptist College. I started at the Irish Baptist College, finished the Irish Baptist College, and but it would still be another 3 years before I then actually found a position in pastoral ministry opening up for me. So I say it was quite a long journey in some respects, maybe from the first inklings that this might be the direction until kind of taking up an actual position.
But you got there in the end?
I got there in the end.
And then you spent 16 years in Gilnahirk, and then you sort of felt laid into being a teacher and a lecturer yourself in the college that you'd been taught in. So what was really the process for that?
I suppose my thinking about that is I maybe to some extent stumbled into it a little bit. I don't think there was a conscious moment when I said this is the path for me. After I'd finished college, there wasn't really very much opening up for me apart from a bit of preaching here and there, and so I was asked to go and help do a little bit of teaching in church history in the Irish Baptist College. So I started there. That led to being asked to do more teaching. Then I was asked to do some teaching in other colleges in the province as well. So I began to build up that kind of portfolio of teaching. And then even when I went into pastoral ministry, I continued to have a foot in that camp, helping out teaching wherever I was asked to do. So, and then an opening came at the college, Baptist College. I was approached and would I be interested in that, and I just felt like the right time maybe to make that move. So I've been there now. I think this is the end of my 11th year of teaching there. Right. So
there you go. So it's been 11 contingents then of of dodgy people. I tell you.
Well, our former principal used to say the great thing about college is you change your congregation every 3 years.
That's true. Of course, yes. So that's brilliant. Getting back to your sort of experience in history. And you've obviously studied a lot. You've done some on the Irish Parliament. And again, for the Americans listening in that, we had 2 separate parliaments, didn't we?
Yeah. So Northern Ireland, or Ireland, had its own parliament. Actually predates the parliament in England. And they had a separate parliament. And that continued on until the Act of Union in 1800, when the Parliament in Ireland was dissolved and Irish MPs were sent to the Parliament of Westminster for the first time.
Yes, and so you've done quite a bit of study in that period as well of the Enlightenment. So many today sort of make that claim that it was the Enlightenment was responsible for making the West great, but your argument is otherwise. So what is wrong with that claim?
Yeah, I think part of the problem is maybe the way we think about history, and this may be a natural way to think about history. I mean, history obviously is a long kind of a long period of time, and we tend to break it down into periods, I think, for sake of convenience, which is understandable. We used to have a joke when I was a student where you'd have said to people, "Have you done the Reformation?" So that kind of idea you do a chunk, and I say it's understandable that is divided up, and even professional historians will be specialists maybe in some particular era, early modern Europe, church history, something like that. But I think part of the problem with that is then that we tend to think of the Enlightenment in a kind of a rather flat way. That the Enlightenment is a kind of a almost like a protected period of time, a protected movement that is unanchored from things that have gone before. So again, I think that kind of idea of the Enlightenment as a discrete movement that is detached from other historical developments is a bit of a false view. Also, the idea that the Enlightenment is a unified project is also one that I don't think any serious historian would really adhere to today. So the Enlightenment in the American colonies, for example, is very different from the Enlightenment in France. The Enlightenment in Germany is very different from the Enlightenment in Scotland, which is different from the Enlightenment in England, which is different from the Enlightenment in Ireland. So this kind of idea there's one unified Enlightenment project, I think, is one that most historians today would recognise as difficult to sustain. And so and also thinking about the nature of the Enlightenment. So I think sometimes we read the period of the Enlightenment backwards. We read from where we are now, and we see certain trajectories developing, i.e. the move away from religion to a more secular culture. But certainly if we look at the roots of the Enlightenment, we find that the figures in the early Enlightenment were not in any sense anti-religious.
No.
So many of them believed that the type of knowledge that they were pursuing would actually end up reinforcing our confidence and belief in God. But I say, if we read that backwards, we sort of think, well, modernism has ended here, so that has been the modern kind of project all along. So I think at least part of the problem is disengaging the Enlightenment from its roots, thinking of the Enlightenment as a unified project, and to say maybe projecting current values back into earlier historical developments.
So for those that maybe this is their first time exploring this period, what is the Enlightenment? Yeah. And I maybe should clarify that at the start. So what would you say is the Enlightenment?
Yeah, well, again, the Enlightenment is kind of convenient shorthand in some respects for a period where sometimes called the Age of Reason, where there is this growing confidence in the power of human reason to understand the world and ultimately to change the world for the better. So this confidence in the power of reason, and gradually, say that initially starts out, I think, with a sense of confidence that will reaffirm Christian beliefs, but gradually that sense of reason becomes increasingly detached, if you like, from its kind of Christian roots. And that brings us a bit more to maybe into terms of how people understand the Enlightenment today, the triumph of human reason over what has often been viewed as the kind of more supernatural view of the world, or I suppose some people think a more naive view of the world, a more superstitious view of the world, that we break free from all of that. But again, I think there's a certain amount of reading back into history in that regard, that it's people who break away then, they begin to call themselves the enlightened ones. So they're the people who say they're enlightened. And interestingly, has a kind of a contemporary parallel that about 10, 15 years ago, when the new atheist movement kind of was in its heyday, Richard Dawkins suggested they called themselves the Brights, which again has echoes obviously of the Enlightenment, but that same kind of mentality that, you know, we're mature and we don't need Christianity, we don't need the supernatural to explain our world. Yes.
So if we're sort of looking at that, you'd said that there was a bit of a different flavour in Scotland with, for instance, somebody like David Hume, or, you know, you have Ireland and the Enlightenment here, but you also have the Enlightenment in America, and, you know, and France, which I suppose Rousseau is dominating, and you could say, yeah, he's pushing an atheist agenda. But then one of your favourite writers, arguably, and somebody you've done a bit of research into, is Jonathan Edwards, and arguably he would be an Enlightenment thinker. Yeah. Was he atheist?
Yeah. Well, again, I think part of the issue is that when we say Enlightenment, there's a tendency to kind of flatten out what that means. But there are lots of different streams feeding into the Enlightenment. Lots of people coming from different perspectives. So Edward's worldview is dominated by the Bible. Very much a biblical theologian, biblical scholar, and yet he lives through the time of the Enlightenment, and I think he does what all Christians have done across the years. He is able to pick those things out of the Enlightenment that are able to help us understand the Christian faith better, and he also challenges many of the assumptions that underlie it. So again, is he Enlightenment? Is he not? It's a kind of a false dichotomy, really. Yeah. That we tend to push people down one direction or the other because we've flattened out our understanding of what the Enlightenment is. Yeah,
and I think we look back on history with a narrative. And very often historians themselves, they want to, look, they're humans, so they're wanting to be selective in terms of what they read. So, how did then Reformed Christianity, rather than secular thought, lay for the foundation of Western civilization?
Yeah, we're always slightly arbitrary. I suppose, the 31st of October, 1517. Luther nails it, and that's the beginning of the Reformation. But again, I think current historians will understand increasingly that the Reformation is a long lead-in time.
Sure.
So what happens with Luther, with Zwingli, with Calvin, and so forth. Again, it has deep roots. Going back still further. So again, I think there's an element of that. Not isolating the Reformation too much, but certainly in that period, in that movement we call the Reformation, I think we begin to see many of the trends emerge that will ultimately underpin modern society. Mm-hmm. So we see the challenge to authority, for example. So again, that's very much at the heart of the Reformation. People say we won't simply accept, what the church has declared unless we can prove it from the Bible. So there's a challenge to the church's authority. And again, that begins to open up the idea in society that we can challenge authority, that we can speak to authority. That kind of idea, although it's several centuries later, of speaking truth to power kind of idea. So we begin to see that. Another very important part of the developing Reformation movement, of course, is literacy. That literacy is no longer simply the province of the highly educated, but again, this idea that ideas are disseminated by reading. We want to encourage people to read. We want to encourage people to read the Bible. But also there's a lot of religious literature produced at this time as well. So you want to encourage people to read. So a growing emphasis upon education, not only for the elite in society, but the need for wider society to be educated. And there's that famous statement attributed to Tyndale that he wants the ploughman in the field to be able to read his Bible. But there is that kind of more equitable idea in terms of education. Also, from the Reformation, we begin to see more of an emphasis on participatory government. So we begin to see the roots of what will become democratic government in the Western world. So it's not that the elites disappear overnight, but we begin to see more of the idea of a participatory kind of political system. Begin to see some of that. There's an ongoing debate about the role of the Reformation in the development of capitalism and commerce, exploration. So there's lots of trends that begin to emerge in the Reformation that have some impact on how the modern world then develops and how the modern world is shaped.
Even a Protestant work ethic.
Yeah, and again, that's one of those areas where there's some debates surrounding that. That idea is probably not quite as much to the fore as it was in the past, but certainly there's something there. That we I think one of the things that scholars would recognise today, again, is even in terms of that idea of the participation of everyone in society, participation in governance, opening out of education. An important emphasis as well is the whole idea of vocation, that vocation is not simply limited to those who are in holy orders, but whatever you do is a vocation. So all work, has worth, all work has value. So again, that feeds into that idea that there is something in terms of that Protestant work ethic. How exactly we understand it maybe is a question of something to debate, but certainly that element is there. And
even the removal of holidays as well.
Yeah.
I mean, now that's, people might be thinking that's a sectarian statement, but I mean, that was Max Weber. He launched his thing on the Protestant work ethic. Yeah. But so all of those things then, maybe laid the foundations for what would then become Western civilization.
Yeah, I think another factor too, if I could sort of interrupt you, Nathan, I think the other factor is there's also, through the Reformation, much more emphasis on the individual.
Yes.
So we begin to see that, and I think that would be widely recognised, the importance of the individual.
Yeah.
For example, individual faith. Mm-hmm. So in Protestant terms, you're a participant. You have to have personal faith. So that kind of growth in terms of the individual, the individual is to learn, the individual is to grow, the individual has significance in their work and their vocation. So I think that's another kind of important part of the growth of the modern Western mind. And
certainly this whole idea as well of, the book of nature was something that, we could learn about God. So there were a lot of Puritan scientists went in and studied, and that was a way in which that science and the scientific revolution, or again another movement that, but that was part of it. I mean, there's no doubt as well that non-reformed Christians played their influence in terms of the scientific revolution and all of these developments. But I suppose what we see as Western revolution, the Western is very much Northern Europe. Yeah. Northern Europe, and it is immensely influenced by Reformed Christianity. Yeah. So, Edward Gibbon, an Enlightenment historian, you could say, famously blamed Christianity for the fall of Rome. Yeah. Was this a misleading argument?
Yeah, it was an argument that was answered in a sense before it was ever made by Gibbon. If you go back to Augustine, and the City of God, he back then in the early 5th century, he counters this idea, that as Christianity is the root of Rome's problems are much deeper than that. And certainly Gibbon's argument has not stood the test of time. Someone has said Gibbon's usefulness as an historian of the Roman Empire today is as a punching bag. He gives people something to have a go at as they explain the reasons for the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. So his ideas have not held up really with the passage of time. So there's no serious scholar of the Roman Empire who would pay much credence to Gibbon and his ideas.
Yeah, I think as well, he was very hard on Byzantium, wasn't he?
Yeah, well, again, you find this as part of that kind of movement of the Enlightenment. There's a harking back to a golden age of civilization that predates Christianity. But I often think of that idea of a golden age, and I think I'm not sure I would have liked to have lived in the Roman Empire. When you consider what a savage place it was to live. So this kind of romantic notion of the past, this idealism about the past that Gibbon and others liked, but again, as I say, I'm not sure there's much about that past that is golden.
Yeah, I think we all would want to be an emperor in Rome. In a peaceful time. Yeah.
Well, I used to have a tutor, a history tutor, who said, I always say I would like to have lived in the 18th century. Yes. And he said, when I say that, my wife always says, you assume you would have been an aristocrat. So, yes, yeah. I'm not sure I would have liked to have lived in the cramped conditions of Rome, with a cholera epidemic or something like that, Yes. So this kind of golden age, it makes politics today look pretty tame.
Well, yes, I mean, there was quite a few, I think I was chatting to Jim Wells about this, that if you were a senator in Rome, backstabbed was literal.
Yeah. Well, that's where we get the term from, isn't it? Really, So
poor old Caesar. Yeah. So
he got the point. Yeah.
Yes, he did get the point. Pardon me. I think as well, just on Byzantium too, is that Byzantium lasted far longer than the Western Empire.
Yeah, about 1,000 years.
Yeah, and they saw themselves as Roman.
Yeah.
They wouldn't, if you wouldn't have went to them and said, look, we are, you're the Eastern Roman Empire, or you wouldn't have went to them and would have said, you're Byzantium. They would have said, no, we're Roman.
Yeah. Yeah, so they very much had that idea that they were the Romans who were left.
Yes.
And interestingly, when the Byzantine Empire collapsed, well then Russia began to think of itself as the heir of Byzantium, and by default then the heir of Rome.
Yes.
So we begin to find the Tsar, which is obviously a corruption of the word Caesar, but that kind of idea. People fight in a sense to become the heirs of true Rome, and Byzantium certainly, as you say, thinks of itself in terms of being, we're Romans,
yes.
we're civilised.
And that's why, of course, you get Charlemagne with the Holy Roman Emperor, and that's then transferred into Prussia as the Kaiser, which is Caesar, reworked.
Yeah.
So yeah, well, interestingly as well, when Rome was collapsing, when the Western Roman Empire was collapsing, or at least in its death throes, we see the Eastern Empires doing its thing. It's consolidating, but in Ireland, and we're coming up to St. Patrick's Day, Irish missionaries, including Patrick, played a crucial role in re-civilising or civilising Europe. So how did their work counteract the so-called Dark Ages? Because there's this sort of idea that there was this great burgeoning civilization called Rome, then it all collapsed because of the Christians, and then we plunged into Dark Age because of Christianity. But how does the Irish and Patrick and the Irish Church and the Celtic Church counteract that myth?
Yeah, I think sometimes their role in that is overplayed. Mm-hmm. They have a role, but it is not a unique role, and certainly this is part of there's part of a wider mythology, really, that again the mythology of the Dark Ages, followed by the Renaissance, followed by the Enlightenment, this kind of idea that we're moving beyond the Dark Ages. But the Dark Ages really weren't as dark as some people like to portray them. So you think a very 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 simple example. That our ideas about law and government are shaped by what? The Magna Carta. Which is an important part of the so-called Dark Ages. So there's lots of stuff going on.
Alfred the Great.
Yeah, so people very quickly kind of skip over these things on a kind of a narrative that these were the Dark Ages. Again, would I have liked to have lived? Maybe.
Under John,
lived through the period of the period of the Great Plague or something like that. Well, no. But again, again, it's a very simplistic telling of the past that somehow these were inferior people, and they weren't as bright as us. But there's lots of things happening in the medieval period again that feed into the shape of the modern Western world. Yeah. The development of the university, is a medieval product. So again, that kind of idea that this was all people, living in hovels and knowing nothing, and running away from witches all the time. That this is so again, there's a real caricature there. Yeah. In terms of, so there's lots of developments in the kind of medieval period, the Middle Ages, that we can look back on and again see certain trajectories that are still with us. Yeah. Still with us today.
Yeah, I mean. You need only look at the Book of Kells. Yeah. You need only look at the artwork and the craftsmanship that you see, and the thousands of monasteries across Europe, which were the place of education, health, healthcare, and everything. Yeah. So figures like Charlemagne sought to rebuild and revitalise Christian Europe. So, what lessons can we draw from that period for today?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. I think as a kind of good Baptist nonconformist, I think my what lesson can we learn from that is don't do it. Might be my first instinct. Charlemagne and the papacy, they go through a period in the medieval kind of medieval era where they need each other.
Yeah.
So Charlemagne needs the church for legitimacy. The church needs Charlemagne for protection. So they develop this kind of symbiotic relationship, that continues right down into the Reformation period. So, yeah, I'm not sure I would have a lot of sympathy for Charlemagne, or maybe some of the lessons we might learn from him. Say my instinct is to say don't, but I see you're going to you're maybe going to challenge that a little bit.
I'm just going to push back.
Okay.
So I think
please do.
Church relationships, I think, were a bit problematic, but there's no doubt what he does is he restructures Europe in a way in which sets it up for the modern state. Now, prior to him, there are tribes, there are kingdoms, but he creates a sort of sense of the European. Brings and it's after him. Then it divides into France. What will be France and Germany, Holy Roman Empire, and also Italy. So he does that, and I think what I really appreciate about him is his statecraft, the idea of a Christian prince. Although, let's be honest, he's got 2 wives. Not the ideal. If you're looking for a Christian prince that period, or a wee bit later, probably Alfred the Great is your better role model. But I think it's that whole idea of, I think, Christendom. I think there is a good thing. I think Christendom's a good thing.
Okay.
So that would be where I would sort of...
So yeah. Well, again, I think part of that really is what the Reformation pushes back against. Yeah. That we have this idea that the church and the state are a continuum. To be born into a Christian state is to become a Christian. So again, the Reformation begins to push back against that. Yeah. And that kind of monolithic idea of Christendom. The vestiges remain with the Reformation, but again, there's a bit of a pushback there. And there, I think, again, we begin to see maybe more in line of the emergence then of the nation state. That becomes a bit more important than the idea of maintaining Christendom. Yeah. I think I'm anti-Charlemagne.
So you're anti-Christendom?
Yeah. You can be his fanboy, but I'm not sure I want to be. So.
Well, I think there's lessons to learn. As I said,
I think there are lessons to learn too. But I think
you're saying
the chief lesson is don't do it.
well. But I think there were. Talking about universities and stuff, he was the sort of one who, in terms of started learning in a more organised fashion, so from that perspective, so there are good points to him, not...
Yes, I'm not saying that there's not, but I'm not sure...
You look at him as a model?
Yes, I don't think I'd want to look at him as some kind of role model, So,
no, I don't think that, but I think there are lessons to learn, so... So the West... So we'll move away from maybe our Middle Ages and move a wee bit closer to home. So the West, as we look around us today, has largely rejected Christianity, certainly from an official elite perspective. So what are the consequences that we're seeing as a result of that?
Yeah, I think the consequences are many. So I think some of them may be positive. Some of them are negative. I think in terms of the kind of more negative side of things, we are beginning to, reap, I suppose, what we've sown. That with the loss of a broader Judeo-Christian value system, very individualistic way that we now think. I think that is very detrimental to society. We've lost, I think, our sense of having a moral compass in the sense that, that is directed, I say, largely by Judeo-Christian values that value the individual, that value life, that wants to see people treated well, people looked after in society. I think we're beginning to lose a lot of that. So I think there's a lot of kind of a negative fallout, from all of that. On a more positive note, I think it does challenge us as Christians to think about the West and to ask ourselves, well, how far has the West really been Christian? For the last 2 millennia. So people have been nominally Christian, but have they really been Christian? Have they ever been evangelized? Have they ever been challenged, as people were at the time of the Reformation, to have a personal relationship with God, a real vital Christian faith, or were they simply happy to, tip their hat and be respectable religious people? So I don't think all the kind of outcome of that is necessarily negative. So I think there are pluses and minuses.
Yeah. Would you say there's more minuses or more pluses?
Oh, yeah. I think that's a difficult one. I think that's a difficult one. I suppose if we're honest, part of what we wrestle with, given the history of Christianity in the West, we do wrestle, I think, a bit, don't we, with having lost that privileged position that Christianity once had, and to be perfectly honest, we probably relied on that a little bit. But I think, what is happening in society, whilst it's a bit of a jolt to us in the church, it's also forcing us maybe to address questions about how we engage with society as Christians and as churches, without necessarily having the safety blanket of that kind of broadly Judeo-Christian ethic. And obviously, it has huge impact on a range of ethical issues surrounding, for example, the value of life, the whole area, obviously, of sexual ethics. So there's a kind of a lot of it does have a huge impact as well.
Civil liberty, things like that.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I remember once somebody said that the Europe is the faith, and the faith is Europe. It's no longer.
No. But the plus side of that is that, while we struggle, the church is exploding everywhere else across the world.
Yeah.
The most populous Christian nation by about 2050 will be China. Nobody would have seen that coming, and after World War II and the rise of Mao. So we see these kind of great Christian movements across the globe. South America, which was long considered a mission field, is now a mission sending part of the world. Africa, again, by 2050, around 50% of the sub-Saharan population will be Christian. So we are seeing Christianity explode across the globe, while to some extent retracts in the traditional homeland, if you like, of the West.
Yeah, and even in the West, it's primarily a Europe thing, because actually even in America it's still slightly going, I think.
Yeah. So again, obviously there are other dimensions. The whole story. That we're not America, and I suppose that's evident. Was it Oscar Wilde who said we're two people divided by a common language? Between Britain and America. So we have certain things in common, but again, it's a bit of an outlier maybe some extent in the kind of the Western picture.
Yeah, no, that's right. I think so secularism, and you sort of hinted at this, promises a form of freedom, but it seems to have created a moral and spiritual vacuum. What's missing?
Yeah, I mean, I think the end game, to some extent, of secularism is, this kind of expressive individualism, where the individual is right, and everyone, to quote the Book of Judges, does what is right in their own eyes. But as in the Book of Judges, it has led, I think, to a kind of a great moral collapse, a great moral quagmire. Again, in much of Western Europe. So the problem with I think to some extent with a secular worldview is that therefore there is no point of orientation. So where do our values come from? Well, it's up to you. It's up to me. So again, it fragments society. It doesn't draw society together, and I think we see many of the effects of that kind of secularism unfolding in the world around us.
And we sort of end in this whole issue of, I suppose there's a schizophrenic approach. On one hand we're individualistic, but we're communitarian in terms of, or collective. We all have to collectively celebrate your individualistic expression, and you get, and with that absence of God, you see the values and the ethics of Christianity and Reformed Christianity, but they're totally twisted. So we see this God-shaped hole in the modern problem, and how do we see that then? How does that?
Yeah, I think part of the issue, and I think what you've touched upon there, Nathan, is very important. Is that while we have tended to move away from God and from a Christian view of the world, we have not fully escaped it. Australian pastor Mark Sayre said, "We live in an age when we want the kingdom without the king." And I think that's very true. Yeah. So we're still very often shaped by the values of Christianity. So where does the idea that the individual matters come from? It comes from the Christian faith. So you take away Christianity, why does the individual matter? Well, you might say matters. If I say he doesn't, who gets to decide? So there's no kind of common point, if you like, of orientation, but we still live as if those Christian values are still important. So again, we tend to view many of those Christian values as normative, but we actually don't have a point of reference that tells us that they are normative, because we've set God aside, we've set him out of the picture. We want a just society. Well, where does the idea that we should have a just society come from? It doesn't come from ancient Rome. It doesn't come from the Greek civilization. It comes from Christianity.
Or Islam, or Hinduism. None of those civilizations have provided.
So again, I think that idea, is very, very important. John Gray, who I often say is my favourite atheist author, says that there's a problem where people try to link atheism with liberal humanist values, and he says atheism and liberal humanist values have nothing to do with each other. Atheism simply means there is no God. If you want to pursue liberal humanist values, you have to pursue them on another basis. It's nothing to do with the fact of whether there's no God or not. So again, I think some of these things become rather conflated. Yeah. And one of the telling things I think really about the 20th century and now on into the 20th century is, yes, people have kind of renounced God, rejected God, but they've also found that, on an intellectual level, a personal level, kind of a God-shaped hole in their lives. So as people rejected God, what you discover again and again is if you study these things, for example, Peter Watson, I think, does a very good job of this in The Age of Atheism, exploring how people have tried to live without God, since Nietzsche. And really the point I took away from his book is time and time again, people have been unable to live without God, because to live without God is to live without meaning. And people can't live without meaning, so people create their own meaning. Well, why do you need to create your own meaning if there is no inherent meaning in the universe? So again, it speaks to something that's hardwired into us. There is that need for meaning. Well, where does that come from? So we don't live like animals. We don't live by brute instinct. We can't live without meaning. And I think that again cries back to kind of the way in which our society has been formed and shaped by Christian values.
And surely there would be no evolutionary benefit.
Yeah.
So say God doesn't exist, evolution's true, then there would be no evolutionary benefit to a belief in God, because it would make you altruistic when actually you'd be far better off, only being altruistic when it suits you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's helpful. And this idea of God complicates it. It's a waste of resources. You have to give sacrifices and all this sort of thing. Yeah, that's interesting. So you're arguing here that secularism can't provide a coherent foundation for morality. Do you think that, I suppose this whole new atheist approach we'd sort of talked about, do you think that 15 years ago they were maybe too successful?
Again, I think to some extent the new atheist movement has shot its bolt. So again, it's not, everybody who's talking about it kind of 10, 15 years ago, nobody's really talking about it now. So that moment to some extent has passed. I think it has, however, for Christians, I think had a bit of a problematic legacy. To borrow from Christopher Hitchens' kind of idea, religion poisons everything. So I think part of the legacy of that movement has made people not think of Christianity as a benign force or a neutral force, but it is in fact a destructive force. So I think that is the legacy, I think, of the new kind of the new atheist movement. People have long since forgotten about, say, Hitchens, Dawkins, Dennett, whatever. But the issue, I think, is they've kind of poisoned the well a little bit. So I think we do live in a generation where people are incredibly suspicious of Christians and what their motivations might be. And again, another book I have in my library that the title says "Christians are hate-filled hypocrites." So I think again that's quite a common narrative that flows from that period.
Yeah. Do you think that now that we're seeing the chaos of the world, and in a sense they shoved God out of the equation, do you think now that there's a bit of a shift happening, that now we don't have God, God's not there to blame, Christians aren't there to blame because they don't have the same cultural power? Now, I'm talking about more UK context rather than say US. Who's to blame?
There is a bit of that, and interesting. I think what we're beginning to see, and I wouldn't want to by any stretch of the imagination overplay this, but I think we are beginning to see maybe a little bit of people beginning to ask that question again. So I think that the generation that's coming up, usually referred to as Gen Z, are maybe asking more questions about God than previous generations who have kind of grown up with that. So there is a bit more of an inquisitiveness, I think, generally about God. A more concerning trend, I think, as part of that is there's also an increasing desire to from that generation to fill that kind of empty transcendence. So the phrase that's often trotted out now is the idea of being spiritual but not religious. But unfortunately, that spirituality is often filled with all kinds of
New Age.
Yeah, New Age-ish kind of ideas. The whole wellness movement, and again, and part of that is because there's an empty transcendence. People are trying to fill it. Again, the difficulty of living without that empty transcendence. Well, how do you do it? Well, you set up your feng shui, or there's been an absolute explosion amongst young people, even such a secular country as France, reading their horoscopes. So there's millions of people every day reading their horoscopes, searching for that direction in life. So again, part of that is with the doing away of God. How do we replace that? And I say, unfortunately, from our perspective, some people are beginning to ask questions about God and Christianity, and there's maybe a greater openness in some quarters, but a lot of other people are kind of pursuing these other spiritual alternatives.
Would you say that then we're moving away from that generation, we're moving away from atheism, and we're moving into a sort of belief? They're open to belief, but as they're open to anything. Yeah. Again,
I suppose part of the question is how atheistic we have ever been, and numbers are very, very small. On a global scale, you take China out of the equation and it's minuscule. So I think we do have to, maybe drill down into it a little bit more and think about, there's atheism, but there's also irreligion. There's still also unbelief. A term I came across today was a wonderful one. Apatheists.
All right.
People who just don't care, and again, there's a large part of that. I think in the West, people just are not interested, so we do have our global problems, we do have our concerns, but for many people life is pretty comfortable here in the West. So a lot of people think, well, why would you worry or wonder about God? So they're pretty apathetic about that. I think Michael Green used the phrase apathetic materialists. So there's a lot of those around. So again, it's a bit of a mixed picture. But I do think we might. And again, I couldn't put it any stronger than that. I think we might be beginning to see a generation who are kind of a bit more open to some of these, certainly more open to spirituality, whether that in turn leads them to be more open to Christianity, what remains to be seen, I think.
Well, there's definitely, when you read, when you read the likes of The Spectator, they had a very famous article, Witch Talk, and it was looking at TikTok, and one of the biggest things they're looking at is witchcraft. You see it when you go into the well-being section in Waterstones, just a whole shelf just dedicated to new views of spirituality, but
it's the age of DIY spirituality. That. So again, it's part of the pragmatism of our age. Does it work for you? Well, kind of well and good. Are you a Christian? That works for you? Well, leave me alone. It works for you, but something else works for me. So again, I think this is part of the issue. That we're not concerned too much about issues of truth, but we are concerned about this kind of more pragmatic approach.
Well, I'm a Christian. I love going to church. During Lent and during all these great Christmas time, and I love it. And I love my yoga on the weekend. And I also will speak to the local medium. And that's the sort of mix and match spirituality that you get. And it's so the question is then, how do you witness in that environment? You know, if we're becoming a bit more mix and match, do your DIY religion, as it were, you know, how do you then witness into that? And I think it is that generation Z, Y, and A. Now, interesting is what you said. I think for this, the first generation that we've not seen a decline in religion. We're starting to see a slight increase. They're less likely to do drugs, less likely to have sex, you know, risky sex, less likely to do take alcohol. And it seems now some of that might actually be a sign of that may not always be a good thing, because it might mean they're addicted to the screen. But take it on face value. They're maybe slightly more interested in God. How do we witness that Generation Z?
Yeah, well, I think the heart of witness really always is always the same. You know, we want to point to Jesus. You know, and my mind often goes back to that incident. You know, where Jesus, you know, stands up on the last and greatest day of the feast and says, "If anyone is thirsty, let him come to me and drink." You know, so here are people who have kind of gone through all the rituals for another year, you know, at the festival, and yet he said, at the end of this, you're still thirsty.
Yeah.
Do you recognise you're still thirsty? So again, I think we want to kind of tap into that, you know, that Jesus is asking people, are you still thirsty? You know, you've tried all these things, you've thought about all of these things, you know, are you still thirsty? You know, well then come to me and drink. So I think we do want to, you know, find ways of pointing people to Jesus as this radical figure who satisfies our deepest longings. And I think part of our witness in this regard too is recovering something of the radicalness of Christianity. You know, that maybe we, with a Christian heritage of 2,000 years, we maybe lost a little bit of that. Yeah. You know, just the radicalness, you know, of Jesus, who he was, the claims he made. I think it's Larry Hurtado, famous scholar, who said, you know, why in the first century would anybody want to become a Christian? You know, the radical message, and I think we maybe need to recover some of that radicalness. Because again, a lot of people will live with assumptions and expectations of what Christianity is about, and they might be surprised by the real Jesus.
What does that look like?
What does what look like?
The radicalness.
Yeah, I think again is just recovering something of that idea that what Jesus is saying, you know, it's not about church, it's not about religion. Is about who Jesus is and what he is saying. So I think we kind of want to connect people, I think, more and more with that radical message, and you know, begin to show them Jesus.
Do you think that becomes more clear as we veer more and more away from the ethics and the way of living?
Yeah.
So you know, think about Bible Belt. You know, when you grew up, I'll not mention the decade. But when you grew up in Ballymena, Bible Belt, the distinction between a Christian life and non-Christian life was for you so inseparable that everybody looked the same. But now we have people who are doing witchcraft. We've got people here who are all sorts of different lifestyles and genders and identities. Do you think then that if you're living the Christian life, that makes a difference?
Yeah, I think living the Christian life will be increasingly distinctive if we're faithful to that. But I also think we maybe need to learn a bit of a lesson again about how to connect with people. It often strikes me in the book of Acts, you know, when Paul addresses different situations, he varies his message a little bit. Yeah. You know, to connect with the people in that particular scenario. So again, you know, when I was growing up, you know, everybody knew what sin was, you know, but today, you know, the only place you'll ever see sin mentioned is on a dessert menu. You know, so even that kind of vocabulary. So again, just thinking about, you know, how do we communicate the message in a way that connects, with the questions that people are asking, and I say again, bring something of that radicalness of what Jesus tells us, beginning to bring that into a new generation. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm certainly not saying that I have the kind of the answers to that. But I think it does require a lot of hard thinking by us in this generation.
Do you think it requires courage?
Absolutely, and I think that's, as Christians we do have to be prepared to be courageous. We do have to be prepared to suffer, and again I think that's maybe something that we're maybe not, I say, too used to come out of that kind of Judeo-Christian kind of safety blanket, that we maybe to some extent had behind us. We don't have that maybe anymore, so it might require more courage to step out and to recognise that the world is going to reject us, is going to reject our message, and again I think just that idea of communicating that to people, and maybe be a little bit less worried than we are in some contexts about winning the culture, the cultural battle. Let's communicate the message to people rather than trying to fight the culture. I read somewhere, someone made the interesting point. We often talk about the 18th century evangelicals getting rid of slavery, and fight for Wilberforce and so on. But the point that this person was making is that's not where that started.
No.
That started with revival of the Christian faith, and the revival of the Christian faith that then led people to take the kind of action, that led them to fight slavery and a shed load of other social injustices. And maybe we need to recover something of that, that Christian vitality. Instead of getting it the other way around, where we maybe sometimes want to fight the culture war in order to promote Christianity. We need to think about the way things happened in the 18th century and look for the revitalisation of the faith amongst the church, and then that will have an impact on the wider culture.
It's interesting you use that as an analogy, because I was chatting to a friend of mine about this, and I think very often the view of Wilberforce is wrong. Wilberforce didn't end the slave trade. The church did. Yeah. And Wilberforce happened to be, I suppose, the cutting edge. But prior to Wilberforce, we don't have any of Wilberforce's petitions. But they were having a look in I think it was the House of Lords. And they saw, and they discovered, enrolled in one of the long Hansards, I think it was, that there was this one petition from this small little, I don't even think it was a Methodist church, I think it might have been a independent, it was a Quaker church. It was a Quaker or a Methodist church, I can't remember which, but it was 27 names on it, and they had written their own petition to ask for the slave trade to be repealed, and that was before Wilberforce. So it's so that, like, I think in a sense it's the church taking ownership of social issues, but that comes out of a true vibrant faith that is also courageous, because remember this, when you're writing that as a church, how would they have felt? Like, this was big business. It was the empire. It was maybe you were a traitor. I think that's something. No, as I have no doubt these things do take courage, but sometimes if we're honest, we like to fly a little bit below the radar, don't we? And so we kind of hope if there's a cultural turn that somehow we'll be protected and it'll be easier. Yeah, but I don't think culture changes by you sitting silent. No. But what we do see, I think, in the 18th century, go back to the 18th century, in many respects, the 18th century was as godless as ours. So again, I don't, in one respect, there's nothing new under the sun. We still need the same vital movement of the Holy Spirit to revive the church and revive Christianity.
give us that courage and boldness that will help us to engage more fully with society.
We need to get our hearts strangely warmed.
Yeah.
You know? Well, look, I suppose we'll bring it close to land then. So, what would you say to a pastor? We'll do this one and then we'll move on to an individual. So, what would you say to a pastor who has children in the congregation, teens who are in the congregation who are skeptical of Christianity? How do you handle that as a pastor?
Yeah, I think we need to be, in the first instance, need to recognise that those people are there. You know, as I sometimes say, we need to recognise that there are people in our congregation who are there every Sunday, but they're there under duress. You know, so they don't want to be there. So we need to recognise that. Obviously, we need to be faithful in teaching them the Bible in the same way that we teach the rest of the congregation. But I do think we also need to recover that apologetic dimension to our preaching. You know, so I think sometimes young people sit in our congregations and think, you know, there's an old fellow like David Luke, you know, standing up at the front. What does he know? You know, and there's all these problems. There's all these objections out there, and you know, he's quite confident in the Bible. He doesn't know about anything like this. So I think we need to have that apologetic dimension to our preaching that assures young people we're aware of the issues, that assures young people we're living in the same world as they are, with the same challenges. So I think there needs to be that dimension to our preaching where we recognise that. And the benefit of that is that will not only hopefully reassure them, it will also reassure an older generation as well, as we help equip them with the tools to answer the questions that are being thrown at us by the wider society. And the second dimension, I think, of all of that is I think we also need to recover something of the power of persuasive preaching. You know, that it's we need to persuade people. So we need to think about how we do that. So again, as we've said, there is that element of we need God to move mightily by His Spirit and change our hearts, but we also need to recognise that He does that through the preaching of the truth. So we need to think something of how we persuade people and engage at that level of persuasive preaching. Okay.
That's helpful. Now, what would you say to somebody who is sceptical? Say they have doubts, you know, that, you know, atheism seems to be maybe more plausible than not. You know, what would you say to somebody like that?
Yeah, I think it is. We're in a spiritual battle, and we never lose sight of. Must never lose sight of that. I often think I never had any doubts that God existed until I became a Christian. You know, that's when the doubts started, and you know, so we do have to fight these battles. You know, so don't. You know, Peter says, "Don't be surprised when the fiery trial comes upon you." You know, I'd say also he might also say to us, don't be surprised, you know, when doubts come upon you, and you know, because we are in a spiritual battle. So I think we need to recognise that, and again, I think we need to immerse ourselves in the Bible, because I think part of that is that as we immerse ourselves in the Bible and really think about the Bible, I think we see that, you know, the Bible isn't a book of plain sailing. No. The Bible reminds us, you know, it speaks to all of life. And it speaks of all of life and the struggles and the difficulties that we encounter, and you know. So again, I think realizing, yes, this is a battle. There's going to be conflict. You are going to be assailed by doubts. You know. So don't let that surprise you. But I say immerse yourself in the Bible and begin to see some of the things that people wrestled with. You know, see them not as characters in a story, you know, but real people in real life, real flesh and blood situations, and begin to see that their story is your story as well.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look, Dr. Luke, it's been a fascinating discussion. We've covered your journey of faith, your passion for history, why Christianity is the true foundation of the West. We've looked at the flaws of modern secularism, the crisis of meaning in the West, and how atheism ultimately fails to provide foundation for morality, identity and truth. Before we wrap up, is there anywhere we could find more about your work and teaching?
Well, I teach at the Irish Baptist College, and as I always say, there's always room for a few more.
Oh, absolutely.
So, yeah,
I can recommend it.
So certainly, I think people are interested in checking out further study, whether that's for some form of vocational ministry, or whether that's to simply grow in your own faith as a member of a local church. I mean, do check out the college. We'd be love to speak to you and chat to you about your own particular needs, your own particular situation. Most of the material I write, I suppose, takes the form of journal articles and tends to be in historical subjects, so maybe not quite as much on the kinds of issues that we've been talking about today. But anybody is interested, if you can check out my entry in academia.edu, and you'll see a little bit of my writings there. And
also you can get his book.
Yes, I'm still looking forward to retiring on the royalties from that, and of course from this podcast.
Indeed. Have to get some royalties. Well, look, thank you so much for joining us today.
Not at all. My pleasure. Thanks for inviting me along.
No, genuinely, we're really glad to have you, and it's good to see you again, David. So we really appreciate it.
Thank you.
To all of our listeners, until next time, keep advancing Christ's kingdom in every domain and moving forward with truth. Thank you so much. Thank you.